The South African Social Security Agency has been embroiled in controversies involving significant systemic failures and allegations of corruption. Recent developments have unearthed alarming issues with the SASSA grant payment system. Good evening, I'm Sizwe Mbofu-Welsh, and welcome to Unfiltered. A key concern is the continuation of payments to ineligible recipients, including supposedly deceased individuals. Over the past 3 years, some have reported that SASSA has mistakenly paid over 140 million to more than 70,000 deceased beneficiaries. To address these claims, and joining me this evening is Brendan van Vrede, Executive Manager, Grants Administration from SASSA, and the Democratic Alliance's Shadow Minister of Social Development, Bridget Masango. Before we delve into our discussion, let's take a look at this clip from President Cyril Ramaphosa to set the scene.
Today, more than 18 million South Africans in our country receive social relief from the government. The SRD grant introduced during COVID, the 350, has increased the number by another 8 to 10 million.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. Thank you very much to my panelists for joining us. Mr. van Vrede, can we just start by situating ourselves in terms of the scale of the social grants payment system and the different kinds of grants that are going out to South Africans briefly?
Thanks, Sizwe. Good evening to the viewers, Honorable Masango. As the President mentioned, we currently pay just over 18 million people in terms of what we call the normal social grants. That includes an old age grant, about 4 million clients or beneficiaries, just over 13 million child support grants. The smaller, and then those are the two big grants in terms of the number of people. Smaller, not necessarily smaller, but lesser people. As your disability grant, we have both a temporary and a permanent disability grant, roughly 1 million people. A foster care grant, a care dependency grant, which is a disability grant for caregivers who, a caregivers grant for caregivers who have disabled children with disabilities. And then we have the social relief of distress grant, which is a new grant that was implemented during COVID. It's still called the COVID SRD grant. Yeah. Hopefully it will change soon. It does look like it's becoming, it will become something more permanent, but still temporary in nature. You would have noticed the Minister of Finance, I think, announced a 2-year extension in his MTBPS, and that reaches just over 8.5 million people as well. So the numbers go up to about 26 million as the clip from the President mentioned.
So there's no doubt this is a massive program by global standards, and of course it's been the pride in some ways of South Africa's social welfare scheme. Of course, in recent years, it has come under allegations of mismanagement. We've seen these reports, and of course tonight we'll delve into the truth of this, people not being able to receive their grants on time, etc. Do you accept some of the claims that have been made in reporting about 140 million being paid to deceased beneficiaries, about hundreds of thousands of people not getting their grants in January this year? To what extent is that true in your perspective?
So, yes, the numbers are true, but one has to look at the context behind those numbers. So in January, do you want me just to go and explain both situations? So
let's start with the deceased.
With the deceased.
Deceased
so
numbers, yeah.
So the challenge with deceased individuals is you obviously got to know when someone dies, and it's the only record we have of someone when they die is when it gets reported to Home Affairs. We ran a payment file on roughly the last weekend. So just let me explain the payment system. When we prepare to make payments the next month, the Friday night on the last week of the month, or the last Friday of the month, we would then extract the data. We would then, over that weekend, do our quality controls. We would check the Home Affairs database against our database, remove all the deceased beneficiaries. So Monday, we can start processing those files to the banks ready for payment. Now that's roughly, for example, in February, coming That will take place on the 27th. Now, between the 27th and the 30th, people will die. We can't capture those. So by the time they die, they would be in the payment system already. And so that's what leads to a small amount. So again, when one looks at 140 million over 3 years, it sounds like a big number, but it's 0.01% of the business that we do. You know, it's not outside of reasonable norms. And also, so what would happen, so in that window period, a few people would die, but their money would be into payment already. We then, obviously, after that, when we run the next pay cycle, we'll determine they did, and we then have to start recovering that money. We'll either raise, if it's depending on the person, if they have an estate, we'll raise debts against their estate, but it's a lengthy process to get that money back.
Right.
If it's a very poor individual, and we'll find out which family member withdrew the money if it's not in the bank.
So you have means of recovering it.
But I will, to be honest, when it's very poor people, the recovery process is difficult.
Let's stop it there for now and bring in our other panelists, because I wonder whether you think that explanation holds water. This is a relatively low number of deceased beneficiaries. Do you think that the problems that have been raised about SASSA payments, especially in recent years, are overblown, or do you think there's a deeper crisis at play?
I think, as Mr. van Vrede was saying, that numbers don't lie. Obviously, that is the truth. But as he was putting it into context, one has to put it into context of the fact that this was done for a 3-year period only, because that's what the question to the minister asked for. So we could have even more numbers if we went back into the SASSA's life and say how many people have been paid that were deceased. So the question then says that if we have been having this problem for that long, why has there not been any change or the improvement in this process that he is rightly outlining, that of verifying or confirming the proof of life and so on and so forth, to bring it closer to the payment day, so that we rid the system of as many people who have been deceased as possible, so that we don't add the money that he says is small. Yes, it is small, but it's a lot of money. Because, as I say, we are talking about a sample of 3 years. What has happened before then? And so why have we not come up with a situation where we can avoid that?
Are you aware of what has happened before then? Is the trend in the wrong direction?
No, I'm not aware. I'm not aware, because the question restricted the answer to go back to 3 years. But I'm saying then it means that this has been happening. So why have we not done something about it?
Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely, Mr. van Vrede. I mean, I guess the one question is, what is the trend around this, and are these numbers worse than in previous eras? But also, 0.01 may seem insignificant on a spreadsheet, but I'm sure for the people involved, because they're so vulnerable, it becomes morally important, because these are the people who are the poorest in our society. And
that money reached them. Right, so I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the times, or in many instances, many of our households, when an older person died, because death is mostly amongst the elderly, they were probably the main breadwinner, or the grant was the main source of income in that household.
Sure.
That grant is very likely to be the last grant that household is going to see of that size, because the old age grant is one of the largest grants. And that makes the recovery process as well difficult, because most of the time when we find, it's difficult to get, the people probably use the money to bury the person. So it's not like money's wasted. There's bigger policy issues that one can discuss there. Should government have a funeral benefit? Then that money could just be deducted off a funeral benefit, or something like that. So it's not necessarily wasted money going to fraud and corruption. It's money that went into a poor household. The question is around just, it's about that timing issue. I think the trend is getting better. In the past, we didn't have that very close checks on Home Affairs. Yes, we can. So there's two factors that may also cause problems. So the one is, obviously, we're dependent on people reporting deaths. SASSA, we can't, for example, the other extreme would be to say every month all 26 million people must show their face at the SASSA office for life certificate. That's an impossible. There's no way we would be able to do that. The only way we can do this is digitally. You depend on people doing what they need to do when the person dies, and our society, I think, generally behaves well in that sense, because most people want to give their loved ones a dignified burial, so they will report because it's illegal to bury someone without a death certificate.
Let's give Ms. Masango an opportunity to respond, and there's still many more minutes to go, and we're only in the first segment. But the view from SASSA is, number one, okay, it's not perfect, but it does go to the beneficiaries. Maybe their families use it in the end, and in fact the trend is getting better. What do you make of that?
What I make of it is that I understand the reasoning behind this being the last grant that the family will have access to in cases where the grant recipient was the breadwinner and so on and so forth. But let's not make that a reason not to work with the system. How about we have a policy or a regulation or something that says that the last grant after the person has died will go to because in the books, how does this money, where in the books of SASSA does this money go? Is it reported as what? We just wanted people to have the last grant, or and so on and so forth. But also, it's a very good reasoning for a wrong thing, is my point.
Right, and we will come back to this after the break. We have a fascinating discussion tonight about SASSA grants. These are the lifeblood in many ways of our economy. These are the pride of the social welfare system we have built in South Africa. However, there have been concerns and reporting in recent years about the inefficiency of the payment system, and tonight we're delving into those allegations. Stick with us, we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're talking about the South African social security system, and in fact the SASSA payments system, and some of the allegations around malfeasance or inefficiency in that system. And also we're hearing from SASSA about whether in fact those claims could be overblown. We're delving into those issues with our panelists now, and Mr. van Vrede, we dealt with this claim of deceased beneficiaries, which it turns out is true, but you said is actually not as big a problem as some would think. What about this problem that seemed to be emerging late last year, but we've heard rumblings of it before, about recipients actually not receiving their grants, that the payment system itself seems to have an inefficiency where with this new move to bank account payments, which are optional, people just aren't getting the money when they need it.
Okay, so another issue that has been in the media is the report of 150,000 people in January that didn't get their payment. Maybe a slight correction, it's 70,000. So what happens is that SASSA has a process of, one of our responsibilities at SASSA is to maintain the integrity of the SOCPEN, the Social Security database. And from time to time we have to review clients when we suspect details have changed. So it's again, and this is where we've got to be careful, because it's one of the mitigating factors to prevent fraud. But it's not, when we review someone, we're not saying you've committed fraud. We're just saying something has changed. And in this case, that for the September clients that were suspended, not a payment glitch as some were reported, those were clients that were suspended because they failed to review their grant. So in other words, they've been given a period of time to come forward to SASSA office to correct details that we've picked up as being discrepancies on their accounts, and that was mainly as it is. So we conduct a bunch of reviews. For example, we would check public servants' databases from time to time just to make sure that there's no public servants receiving grants. And when we pick up, so you might apply for a grant and then you get a job somewhere in the public servant service, because we check when you apply, but you might get a job sometimes later. So regularly through the year we check again. If we pick you up, we'll then say, please come in, tell us what's happened. We'll give you 3 months to do that. If you don't come in, we then suspend you. This was a case we were checking bank account details. We found discrepancies. People's names with their bank didn't, for example, match the names that were with us. Now, a name can be a big thing, cannot be a big thing. For example, we dual income test people. So if you, for example, your surname changed, it could be a sign that you got married or you got divorced. We wouldn't know that until you come in and tell us what happened. But if, for example, you got married, then we now need to take your spouse's income to see if you still qualify for a grant. The only way we can really do that is then to say, please come in. Obviously, if you don't come in, because a lot of our, and then we have to admit as well, that a lot of our clients don't keep their records updated with us. So communication is hard with our clients. So we always stress, please make sure you always have your latest addresses on record with us. Make sure you have your latest phone number on record with us. But we know clients, especially the more working age clients, because there's a lot of migration, they move, so a lot of communication doesn't go through.
Right. And we will come back to you, but let's put that to Ms. Masango. The contention from SASSA is, the number is not 150,000 that didn't get their grants at 70, and these are really administrative problems that you can expect, people not updating their details. What do you make of their response?
I make of the response that we also, as Mr. Van Vrede was saying earlier on, that we need to contextualize this thing. The issue of September last year, the 5th of September, when older persons did not get their grants, was huge. It was no less than 500,000 people that didn't get their money. And these are the people you cannot sit down and say, this is what happened to SOCPEN and this is what happened to the system and so on and so forth. But also, what is concerning is that it happens in batches. Like 1 month, there's 500,000 people that didn't get their grant. And you want to say then that was because of the system that was trying to verify information, or they didn't come to review, or are people reviewing at the same time all the time, or are people reviewing on the anniversary of them applying in the first instance, so that this thing is staggered along the line? It's not on the same day, or is not trapped in the one payment date, as it were. Because that's what happened in September last year. But then that's what happened this year, which was also one grant type, mostly, which was the child support grant recipients. And then when you contextualize that in saying that these are the people that were looking forward to buying supplies for their children going to school and so on and so forth. And I'm saying, surely the system, and in between September last year and January this year, we've had discussions with SASSA. They have come and presented to us, to the portfolio committee in Parliament, and said, look, guys, this is what has happened, and these are the processes that we are embarking upon to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. I am particularly vividly remembering hearing the chief information officer saying that the systems are now as robust as they can. They are being made to be walled against corruption and fraud and all these things that are happening. And right. I'm saying, no, we can't do this to the category of people that the Constitution says that they are poor and vulnerable, so they must be assisted. Because these are the people that can't assist themselves.
Mr. Van Vrede, the 500,000 in September, 70,000 this year.
So let's separate them again, because it's completely different cases.
Sure. Different cases, but ultimately the same global system.
The result
the same country.
It was a different issue, in other words. So this was reviews, right? So this is part of, the process of us making sure clients update their records. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about fraud later on. And that's the kind of balance you need to strike between access and fraud, and the two kind of play against each other. So, if you try and tighten up your system so much to try and prevent fraud and bring it down to zero, access becomes a problem because it's like you're building a prison cell.
So do you think that fraud was the main reason why?
Okay. I don't want to accuse anybody of fraud because then tomorrow I'll be with defamation cases. What we're saying is to limit the potential for fraud. When we get clients whose details have potentially changed, we don't know if those details have changed because the databases that we check tell us something's changed. The only time we know when that thing has changed is when we've given that person the right to represent themselves to us, tell us if it has changed, if it hasn't changed, give us the proof, and then we continue. Now the communication, like I said, sometimes is a problem. We send out letters to your registered, to the mail that you have. We send out registered mails, we send out SMSs to your phones. You might not get them because you could have changed, and the only way to trigger you to come in is to suspend you, not cancel you, suspend you. That will then force you to say, okay, something's wrong, I got to go and check with SASSA what's wrong.
Can I ask on that, just based off one thing that Ms. Masango said, is if we're talking about 500,000, if that figure is correct, why in September was there this big figure and not in another period? So with these problems, one would expect them to be on average the same in any given period.
Yeah. All right, so September was a completely different issue.
Okay,
September was a banking failure within the post-bank systems.
Right, okay.
It was not a SASSA-specific related issue. Unfortunately, Postbank is one of the banks we have a closer relationship with and we brand our cards with them, but those are proper Postbank banking cards. But we've had failures in other banks as well, not necessarily at that particular scale. But from a SASSA perspective, it was not a SASSA failure, it was a Postbank failure. And these are the kinds of things that sometimes happen within the banking system. I'm sure you have in the past gone to a till, for example, and you swipe your card and you get the SMS in your pocket saying the money went off. But then the teller says no, it didn't go off, and then you said no, it did go off, and they said don't worry, it will be reversed. Just swipe again.
Right.
Now the Postbank, like I just explained the failure.
Okay, let's bring Ms. Masango in because I want to give her an equal amount of time, and we will come back to you. We're only halfway through, so there's plenty of time to re-clarify, and I think we will come onto the banking systems in more depth. But just to give you a chance to respond, because you haven't come in yet, Ms. Masango, on this.
Yes, I had just basing all this on the basis that this was a post-bank situation. Now, when you look at the clients of SASSA, they don't know who Postbank is. Postbank is a contractor of SASSA. The Social Assistance Act or SASSA Act says that SASSA will administer, will disperse grants and so on and so forth. So, and people did not apply to Postbank. They applied to SASSA for grants, and SASSA is responsible. I have been told that it's an unreasonable expectation of me to say, until the money is in the hands of the recipient, of the beneficiary, SASSA is responsible. And this argument that says that it was a post-bank thing, it cannot be a post-bank thing. It is a post-bank thing to SASSA, but not to the beneficiary. To the beneficiary, it's a SASSA thing.
Right, and we're going to cut to a break, and we'll be back after that break. We're talking about South Africa's social security system, and specifically the SASSA payment system, whether that is continuing to be an important social and safety security net for our country, or whether there are administrative problems creeping in. Stick with us, it's an interesting debate. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing SASSA grants. Before we come back to our panel, let's take a look at what opposition parties have been saying about recent allegations of the system being inefficient.
Not only highlights the vulnerability of our social welfare system, but also serves as a feeding ground for corruption and maladministration.
The very high number of wrongful payments by SASSA proves the fact that SASSA has ineffective systems to prevent such. That is worrisome, And a very big question that arises is how much of the more than 140 million rand that has been lost due to these wrongful payments has been recovered.
It is clear that not all is well at SASSA and that the Minister is not playing her oversight role over SASSA. Every month, SASSA's constant administrative and financial glitches places our most vulnerable citizens at risk.
Welcome back, Mr. Van Vrede. I know you wanted to come back to the debate that was raised. You can also respond to any of the clips, but we were talking about the payment system and the extent to which SASSA should be held accountable, or in fact some of the service providers such as the post office or the post bank, and Ms. Masango was making the point that ultimately the buck should stop with you.
So I think that one was debated quite extensively. The DA, for example, referred the matter to the Human Rights Commission. I was saying that right, the South African Human Rights Commission, and they have found the same. They have, well, at least if you listen to the Deputy Chair's media interviews that she's done, they found that SASSA can't be held accountable for that. It is a banking failure. There are banking laws. Once the money is paid into a bank account, the money is paid, right? The money is then within the banking space. There's a few court cases as well that's been out, including the CPS court case, or a couple of court cases back in the days of CPS as well,
sure,
that confirmed that even when CPS was the payment, they used Grindrod as the bank that backed them, and it was there are at least High Court and Supreme Court decisions around that matter that confirm that once the money is paid into a bank account, there's nothing SASSA can do about it. Now, we're not saying we don't take, we have relationships with all banks that are well, not all, but the big ones that we are beneficiaries are, so that if things go wrong within the banking space, we can interact with them, we can work with them, we can try and help resolve issues with them. But I think accountability needs to be where accountability is. The Minister of Social Development, for this court case that literally says the Minister of Social Development has no jurisdiction over banks. There's a huge, massive system in this country that regulates the banking environment. It's governed by the South African Reserve Bank, the Payments Association of South Africa, as well as there's 2 or 3 other organizations. And this is a massive this is a massive governance institution that governs all these banks and payments and stuff through the banks. Not saying, yes, Postbank is our contractor. So one of the things, as Honorable Masango mentions, is clients don't know because we brand our cards, the brand their cards, SASSA cards. That's something we're thinking of. Well, we're not thinking, we've already taken the decision to change. People should know they're actually banking with Postbank. The idea of Postbank being a government bank is not us using them as a payment, making payments to people through the Postbank, as to say to people, if you don't come with your own bank account, if you don't have a bank account, if you can't open a bank account for some reason, there's a government bank that you can go to and you can open an account with them.
Right.
But still, you have a relationship with the bank, and it's a banking account.
Ms. Masango, what do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing for the first time that the South African Human Rights Commission's investigation has been finalized, and I appreciate what Mr. Van Vrede is saying. But I'm saying that I'm sticking to the thing that says there is a contractual relationship between SASSA and Postbank, and that contractual relationship does not extend to the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries have, if they sign, when they sign their application, it is with SASSA to say we will pay your money on this and this and this and this day. So I still put the blame, if it is a blame at all, at the door of the South African Social Security Agency, which agency has been mandated by the Constitution of this country to pay grants to the poor and vulnerable South Africans. So that is my take on this one.
Could I ask you on that? I mean, there's no doubt SASSA has taken a lot of heat. This is a very emotive debate because everyone cares about the most vulnerable in our society. But I suppose one question is a sense of proportion, which has been brought up by SASSA. If we're talking about 150,000 people, I mean, if it's 70,000, it's even less. We're talking about, 0.79 recipients of grants. When we spoke earlier about the sums, it was something like 0.01% of the total amount of money. Are you making a mountain out of a molehill here? When we really look at the actual sums, 99% seem to be going, 99 point something seem to be going where they should be going on time.
I'm not making a mountain out of a mole when you look at the individual, because these numbers that we are bending about are actual people, and these are the people that depend entirely. We know the situation of the unemployment rate in South Africa, which has pushed so many people into the queues of child support grants and depending entirely on those grants. And I'm saying it cannot be that we will say these things can happen because they are not common, not, because we are talking about, because of the category of people that we are talking about. And also, if it happens over and over for different reasons, I have just been nicely, corrected that that was a different issue. Yes, I agree, it's a different issue. But the result is, the outcome is the same. It affects people the same. It just unleashes so much anxiety in those areas the same. So let us learn from the mistakes that happen. Let us even have, contingency measures. This is what I hear happens in government and in the corporate sector. What are contingency measures that are in place in the case of that happening, especially when it keeps happening? Because we need to go back even further than September last year. There was in 2022, there were instances of cyber attack where ATM cards could not work. People had to go to retailers. Retailers were not prepared for this. People were sitting with retailers who have no money. You go back even in 2021, there has just been too many cases of this happening. And
Right.
it seems like to a recipient, to a person who is the hardest hit by the situation, it's just too many times that it's happening. And it is unacceptable. That is all I'm saying.
Mr. Van Vrede, we hear the argument that, in a system that is so crucial to not only the vulnerable, but maybe even social stability in our country, maybe we have to have even higher standards than 99.4%. So there's that argument. I suppose the other question, as we go deeper into this, is a wider question about what is the most efficient way to get these payments across, because we alluded to cash paymaster services, that big constitutional court case, which was about the service provider. We moved to the post bank. We have these problems. Is there a deeper structural problem, maybe that you have a unique vantage point on, about the service providers who are making these payments, and is there something structural about this, no matter who we choose, where there's a problem with our ability to get 100% of these grants to recipients?
So if we go back, say, to the Cash Paymaster Services contract, when that contract was issued, it was way before my time, but I think it was 2012. One of the strategic goals of SASSA at that particular time was to move out of service provider payments into the banking environment. And
Sure.
again, the idea there is that if you spread payments across the banking environment, and which again, South Africa is one of the strongest, most regulated banking systems in the world, and to bring our beneficiaries, because we used to run what we call parallel systems prior to that, outside, so closed loop systems without oversight in terms of SARB, etc., because it ran outside of the banking space. The idea was then to bring that whole system into the sort of open, transparent environment of the banks, and to spread people across all the banks to diversify the risk. I mean, that's one of the things you do to try and minimize the risk. So if you have a failure in any of the systems, it's not catastrophic in the sense that everyone ends up without payment. And so the payment failures tend to be, and we fully grasp Honorable Masango's statement that one failure is one too much, but one also doesn't, when there is a failure, not to be 100% failure, you minimize it to for example, that was the biggest one we've ever had in the which was about 3%. And that was the worst experience we've ever had in the country, where 3% of failures happened in any given month. I want us to come back to that so people can, because also when you understand what caused the failure, people themselves can mitigate that type of risk, because that risk exists in the banking environment for all of us.
We're gonna go to a break, and then after that we'll allow you to explain that. And I think in the final segment we'll come to what are the solutions going forward. We've spent a lot of time diagnosing what's happened and get your respective views on where to from here as well.
Okay.
So we will give you that opportunity, Mr. Van Frieda. We just have to pay the bills. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing South Africa's social security system, and in particular SASSA payments. Ms. Masango, as we come to the last segment, we're looking to the future. What do you think needs to be done to further improve our system of social grant payments?
First of all, there was a discussion, I think it was in the last parliament, the fifth parliament, where we were discussing the institutionalization of the grant payment system, and we were looking for a definition or an explanation of what does that mean, because SASSA is supposed to pay grants, but I'm hearing that means that you must have other people to pay grants. So in the absence of that, if that is absent, I am saying that the systems at SASSA also need to be looked at. I am saying that because in 2020, the then new AG commented very, very scathingly about even the databases that we're talking about. She was saying that the systems are weak, the databases are outdated, the controls are inadequate, and so on and so forth. And if you think about the cases where people have been driving around with SASSA cards in their boots, surely this takes us back to systems where the question I still ask to this day is, why have we not gone back to the biometric system? So that we can, because SASSA themselves said in the discussions with us and in the annual reports that helped in avoiding or in actually ensuring that there is no fraud that is happening. So I'm saying, going forward, let us look at the systems. Surely the systems need to be looked at, and let us look at the databases that we are using, and let us look at how else can we make sure that when things happen like this happen, we sort of anticipate them, as the Chief Information Officer said in the last meeting that we had. So that is what, for me, would really help going forward. It's been too long.
Mr. Van Frieda, what are your thoughts about the future and improving the system and making it increasingly better?
Okay. So I want to pick up on Honourable Masango's point around biometrics going forward. So that is unfortunately one of the items we had to forgo when we shifted to the banking environment, because there's no bank that uses biometrics. Well, there are a few banks that uses biometrics, but on a very small scale. And we don't necessarily want to go back to cash pay points and those kinds of systems. Those were the things we had in place for payments as a way to control payments when we were running payments ourselves. We've moved over a decade, like I said, 2012, we progressively moved, utilizing the CPS contract to move people into banks. The Post Bank was a further move towards that. And if you look at the distribution of clients today, Post Bank isn't even the biggest bank in terms of clients. Capitec, for example, is the biggest bank in terms of social grant payments in the country. Or let me not say social grant payments. We pay money for, it's the same like when your salary is paid. When SABC pays your salary into your bank account, it's paid, right? After how you use the money in your bank account, that bank account's like cash in your pocket, and we want to move away from cash. Cash is a big problem and a source of problems for us today. Even the September crisis, beneficiaries themselves can take steps to mitigate. I'm not saying we're putting the blame on beneficiaries. I'm just saying we need to try and bring about that sort of culture change as well, where clients don't draw all their money. So what happened and I didn't actually get a chance to explain this.
What are those steps they can take? Yeah.
In September, it was the normal things that happen within the banking environment. I was still explaining. There's a timeout, for example, between one bank system and another bank system. The money doesn't go through, and then it gets automatically reversed. And there was a critical failure on the Post Bank's automatic reversal process for that particular duration. That was a couple of hours that there was that. So everyone then went and drawed their money. The money was in their account. They drawed their money. It failed. And then it showed that the money's out of your account because it didn't auto-reverse. And that process of getting the auto-reversal to kick in took a little bit of time. Those can be mitigated by not drawing all your money. If you drawed, say, 200 rands, you'd lost 200 rands for a few hours, but the rest of your money would still be there for another transaction a few minutes later. So it's those kinds of things we as individuals as well can use to mitigate the types of risks that could happen within the banking environment. That is the environment we've chosen to use. I don't think we want to go back to closed-loop systems, unregulated systems. We want to use the national payment system, which is it's one of the best payment systems in the world. We don't think our beneficiaries should be kept out of that loop that all of us are in, because that also creates economic problems when you push poor people one way, and the more wealthy in your society gets to enjoy the other methods.
Let's take this opportunity to go to some social media comments, and you can feel free to come back after that, because I believe we've got some comments coming through on social media. Israel says, yes, it's failed. In other sides, SASSA officials are scamming applicants of 350 SRD. I guess we can come back to that and how long that grant will be lasting for. Mzuvugile says, SASSA is continuously failing on its mandate because people have been taught to be tolerant of mediocrity. There are people who are benefiting in undue payments at the expense of the poorer of the poorest. Their conscience is dead. And I think that is the last one we have. We're coming to the end of our conversation, Ms. Masango, but any response to some of the social media comments and also some of the comments from Mr. Van Vrede about the importance of bringing people into the banking system in response to your earlier statements? Yes,
I accept the fact that SASSA has moved on. And my understanding of the biometrics identification system was that you are able to detect if someone has been has committed fraudulent transactions on behalf of the beneficiaries. It's easy to see who did that. That was the direction I was coming from. But also going forward, I think it is very important to make sure that this issue of people committing crimes or fraud inside SASSA the numbers have to go down, and the slowness with which this is done, the investigations and things like that, going forward, there needs to be some kind of a process that expedites this process, because there's a lot of money that is getting lost, and people even leave SASSA, the employee of SASSA, and some even, we were told them, some even have passed away. And this money has not been recovered. So my issue is, going forward, let's look at the systems. Let's look at the anti-fraud mechanisms that can be, implemented at SASSA. Let's look at the slow pace with which investigations are going, because that is money that is belonging to the people that need it the most.
Can I ask what you think, as we end, and I will allow you to close, Mr. Van Vrede, of the so-called COVID grant or the social distress grant? I think it's supposed to last until 2025 or some period then it's unclear. Do you think that should continue? Do you think that there's capacity for it to continue? What are your thoughts on that grant?
I believe that grant came in at a time when people needed it most, and I believe that the high rate of unemployment in South Africa, can you imagine the social issues that we would have if this grant were to go? So I believe very strongly that it has to stay. we are talking 35 to extended unemployment rate of 40-something.
Absolutely. Mr. Van Friede, will allow you to round off the show. Any final and concluding thoughts or responses to anything that's happened? We have about 2 minutes left.
So again, as the Social Security Agency, we are administrators of Social Security, which means we got to find the right balance around reducing fraud, but also making sure people have access, and those two sometimes play against each other. If your mechanisms of fraud reduction are too tight, if you have zero, we say we have a zero tolerance policy, but if for example, if you want to bring that 0.01% down in terms of money loss for deceased beneficiaries, you got to then put overly cumbersome, burdensome methods on your clients, and you're going to end up, you'll see your 26 million clients go down to 1 million clients, because it just becomes so difficult to administer. So we got to get that balance right between fraud and access. And when you play hard on the side, Honorable Masango, on fraud, access becomes a problem. When you push us on access, then fraud becomes a problem. And that's a kind of balance all governments across the world have to find within the system. Again, 1% is too much because of the vulnerability of our clients, but I also want to caution us, saying let's not derail the whole system. We are doing exceptionally well as a country. We're one of the best in the world. This last year, we won 4 international best practice awards for grant payments in the country. The rest of the world sees us as excellent in this particular field. It's a little sad when our own country doesn't acknowledge that. And we fully grasp one payment missed is one payment too much. But we do strive to go for 100%, but sometimes mistakes get made.
Mr. Van Friede, Ms. Masango, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. And thank you very much for joining us this evening on Unfiltered, as we've delved into South Africa's social security system, unearthed whether or not some of the allegations about the inefficiency of that system hold water, and also what the policy directions should be in future for our social safety net. Let's continue this conversation on social media. And thank you for joining us for another installment of Unfiltered News, Unfiltered Views, and Unfiltered Conversations. Have a good night.